Trevor. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to me today. Really appreciate it. I know we've spoken previously over LinkedIn. We've exchanged a few emails, had a couple of calls as well. If I tell you a little bit about who I am and what we're trying to achieve, I'd love to hear more about you and all the great stuff and all the great work you're doing within sales engineering and for the sales engineering community. So this is the third episode now of Trident Talks that we're producing, based around sales engineering, the art and craft of pre-sales. And sales engineering is such an incredible career, but there's a lot of mystique to it about what actually is a sales engineer. What does that entail? Am I any good at it if I come from a technical background or come from a sales background? Are there transferable skills? I didn't appreciate what an incredible role it is and how important it is within the sales life cycle and to the growth of a company. I joined Trident. Trident Search is a specialist cybersecurity recruitment company. I've basically built up the pre-sales desk, so I was given responsibility and ownership of pre-sales to build up within the company. And it's really through that journey that I've gained an understanding, a really basic understanding of what an important role that is. So that's what I do. I look to recruit pre-sales engineers and place them with primarily UK-based vendors, some MSSPs, and they can be startups, scale-ups, or large enterprise-sized companies. And through that, it's really hit me about, again, I say it, and I keep saying it to anyone who listens, what an important role that is as an SE. So that's really why we're trying to pioneer and push these series of talks. We've had Patrick Hassan, Ramsey Maraba, and really lucky to have yourself on, because I know you're doing some fantastic stuff in the SE world. So really what I want to do is just learn a bit more about you, what you're doing, your background, your journey as a sales engineer, and what the future looks like as well. So I think if I can hand it over to you just to get an introduction, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, James, for the context. So yeah, I'm Trevor. I've been in tech now for coming up on 12 years. I kind of started my career as a hands-on like operations engineer, working in defense, in networking and security, built up my foundations. And it's funny that I think it's great what like your focus of like really getting more information out there to people, because the field of sales engineering is one of those fields for me. I always knew it was like interesting, like lucrative. I talked to people in my previous roles that had been SEs, but it's kind of fuzzy how somebody goes from being like an engineer or out of college or whatever into the field. So that's something I'm just really passionate about. I've been an SE now for about 4 years. It's a field that I've never had as much fun at work as I've had the last 4 years. I've learned so much, and it's the first job where I'm like, this is what I want to do. This is really what I want at least a big chunk of my career to be. So I'm excited to be here for anybody who's listening, really just to help share any information I have and try to, like you say, kind of demystify the field, because there is, even though you can't go to college for sales engineering to become an SE, there are tactics and ways to think about breaking in to the field. And I think that the more information out there, the better, because as you know, there's certainly a demand for it right now. So.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, very much. One of the things that it's interesting that we've touched on as well is just the different titles. So people come to me and say, oh, like solutions architect, is that the same as a sales engineer or technical consultant? We've spoken about this, and you've got a really great way of explaining it, and something that I think you've dealt with in the past. What's your take on that?
Yeah. So I'll caveat what I'm saying with just the point that it all depends on the company and the team, because at the end of the day, these are just titles, right? There's trends across these titles, but the audience probably knows solutions architect, sales engineer, solutions engineer, systems engineer. These oftentimes mean the same thing. However, certain companies, particularly really large companies with big portfolios. Like right now, I work at a cloud company, and within cloud, there's hundreds of different services underneath each major cloud vendor. And so for a company like this, there's a real need for somebody who has a high level understanding of all of the technology and how those puzzle pieces sort of fit together. And in my mind, that's really where the title solution architect starts to become apparent, because in my past roles as a sales engineer, it tended to be more hands-on, more like getting into the weeds every single day, because as a engineer, you're oftentimes maybe selling to other engineers or operators. As an architect, you kind of have to be able to zoom out and see that bigger picture. But at the end of the day, the fundamentals are all still relatively similar. You meet with customers, do discovery, you try to influence them to leverage technology that you think will help them. But the role of an architect certainly is different in that it can become more strategic, because we have a broader set of technologies to represent generally. So, but again, it really comes down to the team and the company. So, because some people have an architect title and function as engineers on one or two products, where other architects like myself are covering hundreds of different services and have to figure out how to tie those together in a way that makes sense and isn't confusing.
And we've spoken about it before when we've talked.
Yeah.
And I know that in the previous podcast with Patrick and Ramsey, we've touched on a few character traits and what makes a great SE. From your background, in your experience, what qualities, what personal skills do you see that are required to be a really good sales engineer?
To be really good.
And that's tough, isn't it? Because that could be translated in so many different areas. What makes a good one? Is it demos? Is it, can you liaise with the customer? Can you liaise with the sales team? Are you any good at closing deals?
Yeah.
What do you think like the big hitters are?
Me personally, I think that really having a lot of empathy and understanding who you're talking to, I think that can separate like people who are good from great. Like a sales cycle is, they're different, but oftentimes over months, maybe sometimes a year or two, can that's how long certain sales cycles can be. And throughout that conversation, you have to be able to have a sense of like not going too deep with certain personas and certain customers, but also like you'll be on some calls where they immediately, that's what they want. And so that empathy and just the ability to listen and kind of understand the person on the other side of the camera or the other side of the table and what they need to get value from the conversation that you're having is, I think, really, really essential. Like I put it in kind of two different buckets. Like there's tactical skills, doing discovery, how to do a good demo. Like these are things that I think most people can learn. I think that's a skill you can develop, just like writing code. And then there's like fundamentals, like communication skills, empathy, just like the ability to really think about a call you just had and run through it and imagine what would I do differently next time. Those are things that you can't really teach. It's more of like a mindset that certain people bring. And so I would even, my belief is that people that are really good at being SEs would probably be really good at a lot of other things too, right? Those skills of like empathy, great listening, and the ability to just really self-assess and try to continually improve, those will benefit you in any type of field. So, but yeah, like I think at the end of the day, for me, the most important thing is trying to remain approachable, and that comes down to not going too deep too fast, or not staying too high level whenever somebody wants you to get into the details.
That's interesting. There's some really good points to bring out of that as well. And I think a really big issue for me, and we've spoken about it, is confidence. And it's hard to put into words. It's hard in that situation when you're working in that environment, when you've got such a pivotal role. Confidence is such a massive personal quality to have, because you've got to be confident to present, but also you've got to be confident enough to manage your co-workers, salespeople, those others in the sales lifecycle. And you brought it up beautifully and very eloquently about value, because ultimately as a sales engineer, what you do, you're a problem solver. You solve a business's problems through technology. And as an SE, you need to demonstrate the value of your technology over a competitor's or over a different company or a different service. And a big part of that is confidence. Is there anything that you've done in your time, in your career, to just give yourself a little boost, just to encourage that? I know when I've spoken to other SEs, big thing that I take away is practice, is just practicing demos, practicing conversations, making mistakes, not being afraid to fail. What have you done? Is there anything you could share to anyone watching this about, right, okay, this is how you can build confidence, this is how you maintain it? Because that's just as important.
Yeah, it seems simple in my mind, because there's really two aspects of confidence that you bring into a conversation. One, as a SE, one essential way and crucial way to build confidence is to skill up and really understand the technology. You will never be confident if you go into a room and you don't know what you're talking about, right? So that's the easiest one to fix, is learn the technology, understand the value, how to demo that, how to articulate that well. That's something that I think anybody in the role can develop and get better at. But I would argue that's the easy part, because that's very clear. I'm going to learn how a product works and how to communicate the value of that. The hard part is human beings are way more complex than, just because you know what you're talking about doesn't mean you're going to be confident in a call, right? That comes down to, I think, more focusing on yourself. And this is where, to me, work and your personal life start to blend a lot. If you're not very confident in your personal life, or you're very anxious, you may be very anxious in a sales call. I certainly don't know the answer to somebody who's struggling with a self-confidence issue. I don't think there's a universal answer for how to fix that. For me, I get in my head a lot. I'm constantly kind of doubting maybe a decision that I made, and the best way to get around that is just trying to remain present and accepting that perfection is not a possibility, right? So knowing that you are going to do your best and really trusting your instincts is something that repetition helps a lot. Just getting in and doing the work. If you're brand new, you're going to struggle with confidence. Very few people show up day one and can be really confident. But I think through that continual practice of just getting repetition in, getting comfortable with the tactical work, and also just again, working on yourself outside of work through, I don't know, exercise or therapy or whatever it is that helps you, get a better sense of yourself, and being comfortable with all of the flaws and the good things about yourself, is, I think, more difficult for most people.
Yeah, very much. And you mentioned something there, and you talk about practice, and certainly from speaking to SEs, it really that illustrates the importance of a close relationship with your colleagues, to actually have time to speak to a customer or speak to a client, to learn about the pain points of a product, to learn about what value you can add, to try and manage their expectations and realizations of what they need. And the other interesting thing that I'd love to get your opinion on is, you mentioned about how sales or a prospect could last 6 months to 12 months. How do you maintain that? Because to do that over a period of time, that's, especially with one customer, that can be tough. How important is resilience as a sales engineer? Not only as within the team, but also when dealing with clients and customers, and especially over a period of time when you're pitching something to someone.
Yeah, you need to be resilient, and the best people that I've worked with are also oftentimes very optimistic too. You can't lose sight of the long term, and you really have to, I think, remain scrappy or relentless. I don't know what word is right for it, but
steadfast.
You have to just always believe that there is an opportunity to help. Sometimes you qualify yourself out of a deal early, and that's good. And especially that's probably more practical advice, is if you're in a really long sales cycle, you need to understand where the end is, essential things. A framework that I've used, they call it BANT. It says it budget, something, need, timeline. What is the A? I can't, oh, budget, authority, need, timeline, right? And so a system like that is really more salespeople use it, but it's important as an SE too, because it's hard to stay motivated in a 12-month cycle if you don't know that there's a high probability that the sale is going to actually happen. So sussing that stuff out early, like knowing there's a target date with like a budget cycle or a specific project, helps you keep that persistence, because you have like a goal in mind, and you see the potential of closing it, you know.
And that's a really interesting terminology at all. I've not heard that before. How would you put that into practice? So modern day example for SEs watching, going, well, actually that's quite interesting. How can you break that down? Is there any sort of practical examples you can provide for sort of a real life situation?
Yeah, so I like that framework because it's really simple. There's other frameworks out there that do similar things that are longer. There's one I've heard of called MedPick. I don't know. It's too many letters.
Yeah, Medic, I think is another one.
Yeah. So BANT, budget, authority, need, timeline. It's simple because, like, so as an SE, right? If we're doing a proof of concept or demos or like educating a customer, most of the time we're not talking to the person who has the buying authority, right? A lot of times the engineer architect is an influencer, but they do not always hold the budget. Usually they send the PO to their boss or their boss's boss to get the sign off, right? And so like practically putting a framework like BANT into place is early in the conversation, not too early. You need to get their attention and make sure that there's a fit first, but just asking the questions of like, hey, how is this going to work? If you have an influencer that's you're working with on the cycle, hey, if you like the product and you think and we prove it's going to deliver the value that we've been discussing, what's the process for sign off, right? It really is about understanding their procurement process, and most customers. So customers have different takes. Like some customers understand it and will tell you right away. Sometimes they don't understand it at all, and that's when you need to partner with like a sales rep who can go and like escalate in the account and make other relationships to learn how those approvals are going to happen. It's not always perfect. Like sometimes you operate at risk when you can't confirm budget or authority, but you just kind of sense that if this goes successfully that they might adopt it. And I guess the last thing I would say on it is that framework is important for certain sales cycles, but sales cycles are also changing too. Like the need to find budget and authority within an account is really important when you have a sales cycle that is like, hey, I'm building a use case and then we're gonna sell like a fixed price BOM over 4 years. It's much more important to understand who signs off on that purchase and just doing discovery and figuring that out in the account. Other sales cycles, like the one I work in now, is it doesn't operate like we sell for-year fixed price contract. It's a pay-as-you-go model. In that sales cycle, budget, authority, need, and timeline is actually more fuzzy, because the way you start retiring or the way you start pulling in revenue is educating customers and getting them to use the product versus like getting somebody to sign off on a 4-year contract. So, practically though, it's for your own sanity and motivation. It's really important to have a line of sight to how this goes from just a theoretical conversation about technology, a couple of engineers like nerding out over cool tech, versus something that's actually going to be deployed and delivering value for a customer. It's just asking questions and making sure you don't forget that essential part. And because if you forget that early and you're a year into a sales cycle and you realize like, oh no, we've wasted a whole year here and nobody's going to buy, that's a pretty, I've never been a year in and had that happen, but I've been a few months in, and it can be kind of, it's always nice to build a relationship with customers anyway, but it helps you prioritize your time well, whenever you understand the timeline and the budget of the people you're working with.
And that's interesting that you've mentioned that it's happened to you. How important was resilience when that and being steadfast is when that happens? to go, okay, it's happened. You know, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to tackle it. This is how we're going to overcome it.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. I think it all comes down to like knowing what you can control and like accepting the things you can't. Like we make mistakes, so like I would even say this goes back to like the self-confidence question you asked earlier of like, if you're going to make a mistake, you're going to get excited and get in over your skis and not have these details figured out now and then, and so you just have to continually try to do better and like kind of forgive yourself when those occur. But when that's happened for me, it's frustrating because but it's also always something that happened in the past, right? If you're 3 months in and the light bulb comes on of like, oh, I actually don't know that this is realistic or this is going to get purchased. At that point, you just have a frank conversation with the customer and ask, where is this going? And sometimes you know the answer. Sometimes you know the answer is not anywhere, and then we kind of have to figure out how to disengage from that just for the sake of spending time where it matters. I guess resilience is fairly important there, but for me, it just comes down to like not getting too caught up in the stuff that you can't control, because you're going to miss details. It's a very demanding job. You're going to miss details every now and then. And that's okay. You know, it's how you react to it that matters.
Yeah, very true. Very, very true. And I met up with a couple of friends of mine who are SEs with quite a large UK-based vendor recently. And I just sort of brought up, we were chatting, talking shop, and brought it up and said, okay, how important is like the ethics of sales engineering? And it goes on to sort of providing value and commitment and resilience. Is how important is it to actually believe in the product or believe in what you're selling or you're involved in, as opposed to it's just a job, it's just, you know, I'm just trying to sell it. What are your thoughts on that, especially when it comes down to remaining resilient and keeping that sort of hot steadfastness and being able to move forward with the products and with the mission?
I think it's different for, well, actually, no, it's very important to, from an ethics perspective. For me, like I've been in roles where I've been representing a product for a couple of years, and then the industry changes and the value of that product changes, or the way customers use the product changes, or sometimes you might even be at a startup and it's an early product and you don't know if it's not proven yet. You're an early SE and you're part of proving that this is actually valuable by selling it and seeing if customers adopt it. So yeah, like I think to do the job well, people can sense authenticity, and like if you genuinely believe a product is going to help somebody, like you're going to be more effective at your job, and it's going to be more fun too, because and so that helps from a motivation perspective. But I think that believing in something is very, it opens us up to like common human pitfalls, right? We are capable of believing something is good that's a complete falsehood, and I think we've all seen that like throughout the world when it comes to like and when you're being paid to represent a product, like you're going to keep your blinders on a lot of times and try to convince yourself that it's right and it's good for customers. And so I think it's good to be aware of that. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily. Me personally, like I take a lot of pride in actually like really helping customers. I don't care about closing deals. I don't care. What always has driven results for me is focusing on doing good work and helping a customer or an individual within their department or within their career or whatever. And so for me, it's very important to know, like not to just believe that the product is good, but to have actual data points to understand what is the success rate. Does this actually get deployed? Does a customer a year after buying it say that they're glad that they bought it still? Like there's a lot of things that are important for me, because once I start to get a sense that the product isn't as useful as the marketing might make it out to be, I have to move on. Like once I see that, I can't represent the product anymore, because then I can start to feel myself becoming less effective.
Yeah.
This happened to me one time.
Okay.
I won't say the specific product name, but like towards the end of my time there, I could still enjoy the job because I had a good team and I had good managers, and I was being paid well. But I just knew that like customers would ask me questions that challenged my beliefs, and the choice is like be honest or lie. Like sometimes that like if and so that's I guess that's where, back to the original question, do you have to believe? Yeah, you must, because if you don't, customers are going to challenge you with questions about the value of the product, and if you don't believe that the truth of the product and the messaging, the value that you're selling, then you must be, there must be a hint of dishonesty in there if you don't actually believe it's good, right?
That's really interesting. That's a sentiment that's been echoed by a lot of SEs that I speak to, and I think that's what sets sales engineering apart. That yes, you're a salesperson. Yes, you've got this technical ability, and you're demoing the technical aspects and the positives of a product, but there's a sense of integrity there as well.
Integrity, and also just understanding, right? Like you are an engineer, so you've gotten hands-on with the product. You understand how it works in the real world. A salesperson, that's not their job. They don't need to know that. So a salesperson will never see the full truth, right, of the product, because they need to, well, some may, right? But a lot of they don't really have to, because they go to a certain level of depth, and then once it starts getting implemented, or once you get into the bits and bytes, they kind of disengage. And so as the SE, you're left holding that bag of, does the actual value of the product live up to what we say it will? And maybe that's a aspect of like ethics or morality. I think it's just like, yeah, integrity is probably a good word for it. But I think it's like, whether you are a person of high integrity or not, it forces you to have integrity, because you're the one on the line talking to the people that are going to be using the product.
Yeah.
And you're the one who they trust, right? They're in that part of the conversation. So I take that as personally, that's a huge responsibility for me. Like in work or life, it doesn't matter. I really do not want to betray somebody's trust. Like that means a lot to me. And so I think that's why I think about it the way, and a lot of SEs think about it that way.
Yeah. That's a message. That's certainly a theme that has run through conversations I've had with people when they're in the SE world. That it is about the level and quality of service that you can provide to a customer, and how you can contribute to that. How you can make it doesn't sound like it. I don't want to sound naive, but it's about making a difference, and that seems to be a big thing for sales engineers. That it's actually we're interested in making the sale, okay, absolutely, but that's the salesperson's job. Our job is to add value to the product, make it as a better product and to provide a better service to the customer, and being open and honest and saying, right, this is what it can do. This is how we can help you. This is how you can help other people as a result of it. And I know we have that in cybersecurity, but I can't see, from my limited experience, where else that's pioneered. It really does appear to be sales engineering that are sort of holding that torch, saying, no, okay, this is what we stand for. It's about integrity, honesty. It's about the value that we can add, and if we do that, it leads to a better service. It leads to a better result, not only within our team but across the board. And that's really encouraging. It's a great thing to see.
I think it's awesome. The way I look at it is I love this job. I'm going to be doing this for decades, and hopefully, and I live in a region of the US, New England, and I will almost certainly in another job be talking about another product to a customer that I'm talking to today, or that I talked to last year. Right. And so I value like my personal trust with customers much more than I value a customer's trust to like my employer, because I will leave employers, I will have other jobs, like, you know, and so it's not worth me compromising. Like, so then the second you start feeling like you're compromising your own trust with customers, you're starting to degrade. That really can come back to haunt you in the future, right? Yeah. So there's a selfish way to look at it too. I guess is the point, right? It can be altruistic and like knowing that you want to help people, but even just strategically, like as an engineer, the currency is trust, and you have to protect that. A large corporation is not structured to protect that for you. They're structured to make money, you know, and show earnings growth.
You touched on something really, really interesting there, and it's not something I've heard before, and that's about the currency of trust. And you also brought out the importance of honesty in regard to being a sales engineer, because ultimately you are going to move on. You are going to go and do something else. That currency, how important is that currency of trust in the environment for whether you stay in position for a few years or, you know, you're there for the next 15, 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, trust is how the world works, right? Period. Like from sales to any job. It's particularly important as an SE because that is it. If you talk to SE managers and other SEs, they use the term, we're meant to be trusted advisors, right? So just like in any relationship, if you experience a bout of dishonesty or you say you're going to do something that you don't do, you lose trust, and losing trust is just a lot easier than earning it. So I think part of earning trust with your customers is showing up, being reliable, like delivering on what you say, and that's the part that is fully in our control to an extent as SCs, like following up when we say we're going to follow up, meeting deadlines we say we're going to meet, setting expectations well. That's within our control. But to the topic of like believing in the product or the product you represent, that is partially in our control as SEs, because you can't snap your fingers and get a new job at the company that you think has the coolest product. Like, it's not how it works, right? It's still a competitive workforce, and you still have to go try to get that job. So I factor that in. I factor in the outcomes of the products that I represent in that trust equation in my mind. I've had situations where I've sold a solution to a customer that I thought was the right solution, and they thought was the right solution, but it did not get adopted. So they spent the money on it, they tested it, and it didn't go into production. You can recover from that if they know you had good intentions. But if you see that happen a few times, you just have to wonder, like is this something that I'm doing? Is the product difficult to adopt? And also, I had this question with another SE the other day and I still haven't figured out the answer. It's something I'm thinking about. If you sell something to a customer and it doesn't get deployed, right? Whose fault is that? Is that your fault? Could you have done something differently? Could you have set them up for success or given them a roadmap to adoption? Or did you know in the back of your head that they might not adopt it the whole time? Or is it the customer's fault because they bought it and they didn't allocate the time to adopt it? Or they didn't have the skill sets in-house, or priorities changed? I think that a lot of people, most people I've talked to about this would blame, like their knee-jerk reaction is, oh, it's the customer's fault. They didn't subscribe to resources. I think there's, like with most things that go wrong, there's always a little bit on both sides. And so that's a conversation that I have very early with my customers these days, is who is going to use this product when you buy it? Who is the individual or the team of individuals that will be hands-on day-to-day operating this thing? Sales happen all the time when that hasn't been identified. And particularly if you have a sales cycle where you're selling into leadership, because when you sell into leadership, they can make a commitment without having the backing of like operators and engineers to actually deploy and manage and maintain the solution. So yeah, that I'm kind of meandering on the point a little bit, but I think that the calculation of trust is like, it's a human thing. Like actually, there's a lot of people that are really well trusted and like don't deliver good results. So it's not all about the results that you deliver and like the outcome with a solution for a customer. Like people can work their way around that if you're a really trustworthy person.
Yeah.
But for me, my philosophy of building trust is always based in like transparency and honesty. I think that that's just what I trust people the most, that will tell me the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And so that's the approach that I've taken, and that's what leads me to be very critical of the products that I represent, to make sure that I'm positioning them when they make sense. And even in a situation where I think I can make a sale, but I don't think that the product will get deployed, or I don't think it's the right time, I'll tell a customer that.
Yeah.
And it sometimes it pays off, like monetarily, sometimes it doesn't. And that's okay. Like I'm fine with it not paying off, knowing that I'm doing what I feel is right.